Hi, everybody. Today's Tuesday, January 21st, 2025, and our friend Paul Carrick Roberts is back with us. Welcome back, Paul.
Thank you.
Paul, let's get started with the ceasefire in the Middle East, which was a proposal from Hamas in December 2023. The Biden administration didn't try to force Netanyahu and his administration, but Donald Trump has decided to do that. What's your take on that?
Well, I think the situation in the Middle East can be significantly changed. Trump has the power. In fact, if he wanted to, he could force Netanyahu out of power and replace him with a more reasonable and less murderous regime. It is true that he did force Netanyahu to accept the ceasefire. The outcome of this, I don't know. It seems to me it does symbolize that Trump is not going to be as influenced or controlled by Israel as the Biden regime, which is, of course, a good sign. But the ceasefire could really amount to little more than Netanyahu getting the hostages back and then renewing the conflict. I suspect that's what most people think will happen. I don't know what Hamas thinks will happen or why they agreed, if they expect that'll be the only result, that they give up the hostages and then the war starts over. The whole situation really depends on whether Trump can get under control the Israeli influence on the United States. So many of Trump's supporters are Christian evangelicals. And I think more than half of these people are essentially Zionist. They're called Zionist Christians. They're as much or more in Israel's pockets as they are in Trump's as MAGA supporters. That's a difficulty. And of course, he has the problem of the extremely rich Jewish billionaires some of whom have financed him generously. And of course, he has a Jewish son-in-law. And of course, he's faced with the enormous influence of the Israel lobby over the U.S. Congress and over so many of the institutions, universities, entertainment, media, Wall Street. So whether, how much he can beat back these constraints and still maintain good relations with the Israeli interest and with Israel remains to be seen. But he's capable, if he wishes to pay the price, of having Netanyahu removed and a new, more reasonable government installed. And I think it would still lead to an increase in Israeli influence in the region. I don't think Trump intends to completely frustrate Israel's aspirations of being a complete whole nation and larger in territory. I don't see him doing much to force them out of Syria. He might keep them from going into Lebanon, which they could do now because Hezbollah is difficult for Iran to resupply because of Syria being lost. So there is that possibility. We'll just have to see. We do know that Trump posted, I think it was Jeffrey Sachs' video appearance in which Netanyahu is called a dirty son of a bitch. So Trump himself posted that. So that certainly gave Netanyahu a message and gave Netanyahu's Israeli opponents a message. We have to keep in mind that Netanyahu is really not in that strong of a position inside Israel. He has got a minority government. He relies on support from right-wing elements. They're called right-wing. I would just say they're Nazi-type elements that are worse than he is. But there are a lot of Israelis, and political parties, and newspapers such as Haaretz, who are not in the least bit happy with Netanyahu. So it's really just up to Trump how much weight he gives this in terms of all the other things he's undertaking simultaneously. It remains to be seen, but there are prospects that the situation could be changed. One other difficulty that Trump could face is that so many of his appointees in foreign affairs and military, national security positions are themselves Zionist, with strong feelings in favor of Israel, and they're antagonistic to Iran. So whether they fall in line, should Trump want to put more control over the situation, would also remain to be seen. If they don't, he'll simply have to remove them. So it really depends on how forceful he wants to be. If he wants to be forceful enough, I think he has very strong public support. He overwhelmingly won the election. The Biden regime is the most discredited government in American history. They have no influence, particularly after Biden has pardoned his own crime family. And not a single one of the wrongly prosecuted and imprisoned Trump supporters were pardoned by Biden. And particularly as Trump has closed the border, has said that you can't become a citizen any longer by coming to our country and giving birth and then claiming birthright citizenship. And most especially by his and commuting the sentences of the so-called January 6 rioters. Of course, they didn't riot. There was no insurrection. But I think that being done on his first day in office has given him tremendous public support. So he has the position to take policy back from the neoconservatives, to take it back from the Israel lobby, to take it back from Netanyahu, and to completely change that situation. That doesn't mean he'll do it, but he has this capability, in my opinion.
We know how much Donald Trump is dependent on his personal relationship with the leaders around the world. Whenever he talks about Russia, he talks about he himself, Donald Trump himself, and Putin with Xi. And here comes the question between the United States today under Donald Trump and Netanyahu in Israel. Netanyahu was not invited to his inauguration in the United States. What's that going to tell us about the relationship, the current state of the relationship between Donald Trump and Netanyahu as two persons, as two leaders?
Well, it's it's telling Israel that they've got the wrong leader, and that they're falling out of American protection and concern, and that they've got to behave differently. And by behaving differently, it means doing what Trump tells them. So I think it's a strategic, brilliant move Trump has made. And it also tells the American neoconservatives and the unreliable elements in the CIA that don't try to pull any false flag events on me to lock me into some kind of Israeli policy. I'm not going to tolerate it. So I think it was a brilliant strategic stroke by Trump, and it has the promise for a change. And I think we can say the same thing about NATO and about the Russian-Ukrainian situation. If you want to talk about those, I'll leave that up to you. I would only say that there is a discordant element, and that is Trump's tremendous emphasis in his inauguration speech on American exceptionalism. We're going to be more exceptional than ever. Well, American exceptionalism has always been an American liberal claim that we are exceptional, and so we deserve more influence and all of that. And of course, the Zionist neoconservatives made a huge thing out of it, and they turned it into American hegemony over the world, which kind of goes beyond being exceptional. And so his expression of all that, he may find that American exceptionalism, he wants to use Israel to expand American influence in the Middle East, not Israel's. Well, that's going to make it difficult not to have confrontations with Iran, for example. He may find that the emphasis on American exceptionalism makes it impossible for him to make a deal with Putin, because Putin has rejected this notion of American exceptionalism or hegemony. So that's kind of a discordant. We'll have to wait and see how in Trump's mind, except the role played by exceptionalism. If it's mainly to back up his claim to Panama, to back up his the pressure he's putting on Greenland and Norway, to give him whatever he wants there. I'm not sure why what he's after in Greenland. I don't think it's some wealth of minerals, or it's probably air bases, naval bases, more access to the Arctic. The Russians are in the Arctic trying to develop things, and maybe he feels this cuts us out. We've got to get involved. I don't know. But the exceptionalism, if it's just to justify some territorial additions, is one thing. But if he means it in the sense of American hegemony, then that's that's at odds with finding peaceful solutions to wars. I don't think Trump wants wars. I really don't. I believe him when he says that. But wars are part of exceptionalism. I mean, we've been drug into wars and wars and wars all about that. The Vietnam War, for example. So he may be trapping himself by having conflicting agendas. We'll just have to see. And if he does find himself with conflicting agendas, which I think he will, he'll have to make a choice between them. Otherwise, the whole regime would just unwind, it would unravel. If you're trying to pursue mutually contradictory agendas, you can't get anywhere.
Paul, what's the necessity of changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America? How would the United States benefit from that, in your
Well,
opinion?
it's just symbolism. It's not to benefit the United States. It's to make the Trump supporters feel that we are becoming somebody again. We're taking the lead. I don't think it has any other intention. I don't know that it matters in any strategic sense what you call it. I'm accustomed to it being the Gulf of Mexico. I live on the Gulf of Mexico. If they want to call it the Gulf of America, I don't really think it matters. It may insult Mexico, but that's not his purpose. I think the purpose is purely psychological, emotional. It's a sign that we're back and we're strong again and we're rising. And I think that's all it is.
Here is what he said about the future of the ceasefire in Gaza, Paul.
President, that you can keep the ceasefire in Gaza and conclude the 3 phases of this deal?
I'm not confident. That's not our war, it's their war, but
Apologize.
I'm not confident, but I think they're very weakened on the other side.
Do you support the 3-state?
Gaza, boy, I looked at a picture of Gaza. Gaza is like a massive demolition site. That place it's really got to be rebuilt in a different way.
Do you plan to help rebuilding Gaza?
I might. Gaza is interesting. It's a phenomenal location. On the sea, best weather. Everything's good. It's like some beautiful things could be done with it, but
Yeah. He says a very important sentence that these are not our wars, these are their wars.
Yeah.
Is he going to stick with the same kind of mindset during his administration, during these 4 years to come, in your opinion?
I think that's his intention. For a number of years, he has said we don't need NATO. Why are we in it? Why are we paying for all these Europeans and all that? And now, you could say that all he's doing is putting pressure on the NATO countries to cough up more of the money for the expenses of NATO. So you could say, okay, this is just the art of the deal. This is a negotiating tactic. He's putting pressure on them. I'm going to quit this organization if you don't start paying. On the other hand, he may actually mean it, that we have, or the United States has, many problems and needs full attention of the government and all the resources the government can have. And so what the hell are we doing, trying to start wars with Middle Eastern countries, with Russia, having all this commotion with NATO and military exercises on Russia's border and provoking people that get prepared for war, and it costs us the money to stay matched and distracted from the attention that we need to give it home. And I think he's sincere about that. It makes sense. We haven't needed NATO since 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed. In fact, we haven't needed it since Reagan and Gorbachev made their agreements. So NATO's, almost 35 years out of date. We just had no purpose for 35 years. And so we're always trying to find another purpose. So we carry it into our wars for Israel in the Middle East. We're now trying to carry NATO into the Far East to use it against China. Well, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization was for protecting Europe from a Soviet invasion, which I don't think was ever intended or possible. But that was its purpose. So it's clearly being expanded far beyond the purposes. Oh, it's in service of Israel. It's in service of restraining China. I mean, it's a nonsensical organization. Moreover, I don't think it has any military strength. My own opinion is that Europe is not capable of going to war. They were destroyed by World War I and World War II, and there's no taste for war. The populations aren't interested in any war. This is the governments that have been purchased by Washington. And the leaders of these governments, they get rich by serving the military security complex in the United States. They get rich by getting NATO positions. And all these positions then translate into memberships on the boards of global corporations. They get huge directors' fees. It's just a way of a very tiny percentage of Europeans, a small elite, getting rich and being important and running around the meetings and having all kinds of special privileges. That's all that NATO is. It's not, I mean, really trying to imagine a Dutch army, a Belgian army, or even a German army. You can't. A British army. I don't even think they've got one division of soldiers. I mean, they measure their strength in regiments. Imagine a Norwegian army, a Danish army, an Italian army. So, yeah, I think that Trump.
Oh, you mentioned Germany, and we know that AfD, Alternative for Germany, is getting its momentum in Germany, and they're growing within the population because of their policies that are different from what they have been experiencing for more than 2 years, 3 years of the conflict in Ukraine. Do you think that this party is able to bring some drastic changes to the policies of Germany?
Yes, I do. I think what's happened in Germany, and I think it's happening in all the countries, the ethnic populations, like the German ethnic population, that is the basis for the name Germany, they've been suffering for decades under governments that give preference to immigrant invaders. This is true all over Europe. It's true in Norway, in Denmark, in Sweden, in Britain, in France. You see, we've had recently, Elon Musk brought it to light. The scandal that for 30 years, Pakistani rape gangs have forced 250,000 young, underage British girls into sex slavery, where they are repeatedly gang raped. That the government and the police knew all about this and refused to do anything about it. Instead, warning the parents who complained about the rape of their daughter to shut up or they'd be arrested as racist for making charges against people with dark skin. Well, this has caused the populations all over Europe to have no respect for the government, no confidence in it. And so what is this so-called right-wing party in Germany? It's not right-wing. This is a name you use to discredit something. They're saying, you know, the government really is supposed to represent its own citizens, not immigrant invaders. It shouldn't be applying law more harshly to its own citizens than it does to non-citizens who come here and commit crimes. So this is why that party is rising. It's the same reason for the rise in France of Marine Le Pen's party. You know, the Le Pen party now is the largest party in France. But it's kept from power because all the others gang up on it and prevent it from leadership positions. You see, the French political scene is so fractured, there's so many parties, that you can be the largest party and still be far from a majority. And now we see Le Pen is facing a prison sentence for a non-crime. It's the same kind of weaponized law that was applied to Trump in the United States. So these tiny establishments are desperate to hold on to power. And so the rise of the new party in Germany, it's under fierce attack. Marine Le Pen's under attack. In England, the people who object to the government being run for the purpose of Pakistani rape gangs, they're being attacked. So I think that you can't imagine a weaker political system anywhere in the world than the EU, than the European countries. They have no public support. And the public can't do anything about it because they're not allowed candidates who would represent them instead of Washington or the American military security complex or immigrant invaders or this DEI ideology. And so I think Europe is essentially no longer a player in the world. It's of no consequence. I think that's Trump's opinion as well. Why are we bothering with them? They're useless. And so
How about the policy toward Russia, Paul? They want to reconnect this pipeline between Russia and Germany. Are they going to be able to do that? Is the Trump administration willing to let them to do that?
I don't know. I think in some ways Trump would favor it, but again, it's at odds, or it could be at odds with American exceptionalism, with America, rebuilding itself, having more influence than ever. Trump may find that aspect of his agenda makes it hard to let go of whatever hold or constraint that he has on Russia. And I think it'll make it hard for Putin to negotiate with Trump about Ukraine. I think Putin has made a fundamental blunder by not ending that war before Trump gets in office. Now, he may think, oh, well, Trump's more reasonable and we can make a deal. But you see, Trump, the last thing Trump wants to read is a newspaper headline that Trump sells out Ukraine to Putin, which is what the whore American media will write. So really, by not bringing the war to a conclusion before a tough guy gets in there, it may be very hard for Putin to get an agreement that doesn't require him to surrender some of his goals. And that then will hurt him at home because people will say, how come we fought all these years and we didn't get anything out of it? So, it's like I said at the beginning of our conversation, there are many, many good things in Trump's program. And They have a lot of promise, but there are some discordant things that could undermine them all. And so let's hope they don't, because we certainly don't need to have endless tensions between the United States and Russia, because the strategic capability of Russia is unrivaled. And we simply don't have comparable weapon systems. And if we have to go develop these weapon systems, then there's not going to be any money for any of Trump's other projects. And if you have a nuclear arms race going again, sooner or later it's going to explode. I mean, this was the fear all during the Cold War of the 20th century. It's why so many American presidents and general secretaries of the Communist Party worked to diffuse tensions. Well, that stopped. And all the agreements that were made, for particularly those by Nixon, have been repealed. And so we're back at where we were in 1950. It's a dangerous situation. So let's hope that Trump will realize that there are discordant elements in this American exceptionalism. There are discordant elements in him wanting to look powerful, not personally for himself, but for America, to make America look powerful. So his supporters feel that something is being achieved, and will stay with him, and it will build a core for his successor, which I think he hopes is J.D. Vance, at least at this point in time. And if you're trying to build a momentum so that it carries forward and you don't get another Biden regime that undoes everything you've done and cancels all the executive orders and opens the border again and brings back DEI privileges and all of that. So that, I think, is the basic goal Trump has, is that this is not to be a 4-year operation. This is to continue. And so for it to continue, the people have to feel like it's getting somewhere, that it's rewarding them emotionally. And they feel better about themselves and their country because people aren't walking all over us. Our own government's not walking all over us the way the Biden criminals did. So if we look at it that way, I think we can understand what he's up against, and we can see the promise in it, and we can see the risk in it.
Here is what he said, Paul, in the day before his inauguration about the conflicts in Ukraine and in the Middle East.
I will end the war in Ukraine, I will stop the chaos in the Middle East, and I will prevent World War III from happening, and you have no idea how close we are.
Yeah. He doesn't want the outcome of what he said, for me, is that he's not interested in these endless wars that these people in the United States, as neocons, as you mentioned, are pushing for. Here is what Lindsey Graham said about Iran and the United States and what he's going to do with Donald Trump.
I will be engaging in with President Trump is to take this moment in time to decimate the Iran nuclear program because they're so
What
exposed.
does that mean?
Help Israel
What does that
deliver a
mean?
knockout blow.
What does that mean? You're going to urge him to have Israel
capability.
bomb Iran's facilities that are underground and would require U.S. military support to actually be effective?
I'm going to urge the decimation of the Iranian nuclear program. I don't think diplomacy works.
Yeah. How these people like Lindsey Graham, do you think that Donald Trump would consider their opinion in his policies?
No. I think Lindsey Graham is insane. He's stupid beyond belief, and I don't think he has any influence any longer. He was very valuable to the Democrat neoconservatives because it was a Republican saying things that they said. Trump won't appreciate this type of interference, and neither will Trump's government. So I don't expect Lindsey Graham to have any influence. It's curious to me that the people in South Carolina would elect a man this stupid, you know. I mean, he thinks he can go to war with Iran and nothing happens except what we want. We don't seem to learn. We go to war with the people, all kinds of things happen that aren't what we want. You know, I'm not the only one that stressed it's been a long time since the United States won a war. And if you can't defeat a few thousand lightly armed Taliban, you're going to be up against it with Iran. So, and particularly if this agreement, which I think is toothless, between Putin and Iran, if it means anything, then attacking Iran has a new form of risk. I'm not sure the agreement means anything. I think it's Putin trying to look like he's doing something without having to do anything. I think that's all it is. But you never really know until something's tested. And it seems clear to me, strategically, that Iran is more important to Russia than Ukraine. Because if the same thing happens to Iran that happened to Libya and Iraq and Syria, well, Washington, the CIA, is going to be sending jihadists into the Russian Federation. And the Russian Federation consists of many Muslim areas and provinces. And so this would be a nightmare for the Kremlin. And of course, if Iran actually fell, and there could be missile bases in Iran, essentially on Russia's border. So Putin may not want to have any responsibility for Iran, but I don't see how the Russians can avoid it, because what's at stake is their own security. And if Putin may dance around it, but if it comes push to shove, I'm not sure the Russian general staff is going to let him dance around it. I suspect they're annoyed at him already for letting Syria fall. Now, people can say, oh, he couldn't do anything about it, blah, blah, but of course he could have done something about it. He's chose not to. I think he underestimated the cost to Russia of the destruction of Syria. And I think the military will remind him of it if Iran looks like the next one. But I don't know that. But the Russians have not been all that astute at recognizing the threat to their existence that the United States has so far presented. Now, Trump may stop all that, and he may make it clear it's stopped, in which case Lindsey Graham is not going to succeed in attacking Iran, unless Trump decides it's important to show how tough we are, and we're back. And we're back now, see, we're back. So once again, I would have been much happier if he had not mentioned American exceptionalism in his inauguration speech.
Paul, there are people that they do believe that Donald Trump is negotiating, even before his inauguration, was negotiating with Iranians behind the scene in Oman and other countries. And do you think that's the case? Because right after 2024 presidential election, we had Elon Musk talking with Iranian representative in New York. And one of the main reasons, the Italian journalist, if I'm not mistaken, she was released from Iran, that Elon Musk publicly said on X that it was part of the talks he had with Iranians. And Iranians denied that. But if there is, do you find the possibility of having a secret negotiations behind the scene that nobody is aware of between Donald Trump and Iranians?
I have no idea. It's kind of hard to have negotiations no one knows of. I have no idea, but I wouldn't see any reason he shouldn't. I mean, his job is his self-declared job, Trump's self-declared job, is to end the conflicts. And you can't do that if you're not talking to the people who are in the conflict. The people who object to speaking to people in a conflict are the ones who don't want the conflict to end. Remember what they did to General Flynn in Trump's first administration. General Flynn was appointed National Security Advisor, and so he did what he's supposed to do, was talk to the Russians, and he had to be fired for talking to the Russians. This shows how weak Trump was in his first term and how weak his administration was. Now, I think a second term, he's not going to be such a pushover as he was in his first term. And certainly when he let Flynn go, I knew his administration was finished. He had already run up the surrender flag. I don't think that'll happen this time. And so if Trump's people are doing their job, they're talking to Iran. This is what they should be doing, and there's nothing wrong. And it fits in with the pressure he's putting on Netanyahu. So, there's one other thing. You pointed out what Trump said about Gaza and all that's not our war. But I noticed in the clip you played that Trump was speaking about the wonderful coastline and the great climate and all the things can be done with that. Well, now that's what his son-in-law has been saying. And I suspect, based on reports that may or may not be true, that his son-in-law is out trying to raise money for developing what will be Israeli Gaza, coastline into a resort area. And if you listen close to that clip that you played, that sounds like what Trump was saying. This could be a good resort area. I mean, well, that'd be part of making money. And in Trump's mind, making money is part of making America great again. So
we know that Elon Musk is the most influential person in his administration. Wherever he goes, Elon Musk is with him and talking to the people, to the crowd. And on the other hand, I do believe that Elon Musk is not interested in wars. He's not interested. That could bring us some sort of hope about Donald Trump, in your opinion.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, Donald Trump would rather put the American flag on Mars than go to war. And it'd be cheaper to put the flag on Mars. and more of a success. So, yes, I think on the whole, the only bad aspect of Musk is his support for H-1B visas. And he sold those to Trump. And we've talked about this before. I think we did. I know that I've written about it. The H-1B visas and the L-1 visas are at odds with giving American jobs back to Americans. You can't just do that by closing the border with Mexico against the illegals. They're not the ones taking the good jobs. The ones taking the good jobs are the Indians coming in on H-1B and L-1 visas. And these are a large number of people every year. And some American IT areas are simply being Indianized. There's no Americans in them. And so I think that's the down.
By the way, the argument that Elon Musk is giving us, he said that I came to the United States using H-1B visas. That's why I'm supporting that.
Right, but you see hardly any white people come in on these visas. They won't, and certainly they don't want Elon Musk in on them. They want people they don't have to pay much, but who have the technical skills to do the job so they can get rid of the American workforce. Moreover, these H-1B people and the H-1B people, they don't have any rights. They're like indentured servants. They're tied to the firm, but they can't make demands for better pay or better conditions. They can't file discrimination suits. They can't claim sexual abuse. They can't make any claims. And they have to be reapproved every year. So any troublesome person is gone. So in effect, they're a form of slave. And they're exploited economically. They're not paid the same wage. Now, the law says they have to be. But what these firms do, they employ all of these law firms to define the job in a way that it's different and lower paid. Supposedly, the law says you can't replace an American with an H-1B. But again, the firms employ law firms who advertise that we advertise the job in a way that Americans aren't qualified. So the whole thing is rigged, and the law is evaded on every respect. So when they claim, oh, well, you really can't pay them less, oh, and you can't use them to replace Americans, they're just telling lies, because there's a huge industry out there doing that. Fixing the definition so Americans can't be qualified, defining the job in a way that it pays less. So I wrote a book, The Failure of Laissez-Faire Capitalism. There's a whole section in there documenting all of this. It's all cited, documented, quoted, names. It's all there. It's been going on for years. It's a racket. So that's the downside.
Yeah. Here is what Donald Trump said about the conflict in Ukraine. He's pointing out some crucial points that I think would be so much important for Russians to negotiate with him.
Could be very soon.
And you talked a bit about Ukraine and Russia, but how long do you think it would take to end that conflict? And
I have to speak to President Putin. We're going to have to find out. He can't be thrilled. He's not doing so well. I mean, he's grinding it out, but most people thought that war would have been over in about 1 week. And now you're into 3 years, right? So he can't be thrilled. It's not making him look very good. Now, eventually, I mean, it's a big machine, so things will happen, but I think he'd be very well off to end that war. We have numbers that almost 1 million Russian soldiers have been killed. About 700,000 Ukrainian soldiers are killed. Russia's bigger, they have more soldiers to lose. But that's no way to run a country.
Yeah, two parts. One of them is that criticizing Putin, not criticizing that, just diminishing the role of Russia in Ukraine, that they were not capable of putting an end to the conflict in a week as they wanted to do it. But we know that Russia never claimed that they're gonna capture Ukraine in 1 week. The second part, Paul, which is so unbelievable on the part of Donald Trump, is just saying Russia has lost over 1 million soldiers. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
It's not just a fraction of that he's mentioning, and just underestimating the casualties on the part of Ukrainians. Who's giving this sort of information to him?
Well, that's a good question, but that information is everywhere. It's I think it's very heavily was in the British press. I used to read in the British newspapers every day about Russia was facing collapse in the morning, and the Russian army was defeated, and the army was wiped out. And so all of this has been going on so long, it's just filtered down everywhere. I have friends that I know who are they're skeptical about everything. They don't believe the media and all the rest, but they believe all these stories about Russian casualties. And so if the media tells lies, year after year, they become truth. So I think in that clip you showed, Trump is really just explaining to a newspaper journalist that there are grounds on which we can solve this, that this war is going on, and if it's gone on too long, it doesn't really serve Putin's purpose, and so we can come to a deal. Well, this is where I say Putin has blundered. He should have ended the war before Trump gets in, because the way Trump sees it, he has negotiating power over Putin. So that makes it impossible for him to accept Putin's terms that Putin has declared over and over and over, and the Russian people have heard over and over and over, and the Russian military have heard over and over and over. And so how is this going to lead to a settlement? So really, since Putin has never wanted to conquer Ukraine, he's only wanted these Russian cultural speaking areas in order to protect them. He doesn't want them. He initially refused them. You may have to remember that. When they asked 8 or 9 years ago to be reincorporated into Russia like Crimea, he refused. He said, no, you stay in Ukraine, and we're going to get this Minsk agreement so you'll have some autonomy and you'll be able to avoid the persecutions. And so he was just forced into protecting these people. They all used to be part of Russia. It was the Soviet communist officials who stuck them into the Ukrainian province of the Soviet Union. It didn't make any difference to these communist officials because Ukraine, Russia was all the same country, Soviet Union. So I think that Putin, since he doesn't want anything beyond that limited area, and he almost has all of it, he should hurry it up so that it's over with. And then the question is, what happens to the part of Ukraine he hasn't bothered and doesn't want? Can he get an agreement that he won't go into NATO? Can he get an agreement that the American and NATO missile bases already in Ukraine firing missiles into Russia will be shut down? If he can't, he's got to realize that his limited military operation was insufficient for his purpose, and he'll have to go after Ukraine. And I think this time the general staff will tell him, well, we're not going to do it in your go slow war forever way. We're going to knock them out immediately. And so then all of a sudden the world wakes up, well, we misjudged the Russian military. Ukraine's gone. We better start behaving or we'll be gone. And so this is just a scenario that could unfold. But you can see that Trump thinks he has negotiating leverage. Putin has been unconditional about his terms, his goals. So the best way not to lose is to win the war and to get it over with. And I really can't come up with an intelligent, sensible explanation for why Putin chose to let a war drag on forever until the Americans were so involved they're sending missiles into Russian cities. It makes no sense. What did he achieve? Nothing except humiliation. And I imagine there must be a lot of internal dissent. Indeed, I saw just the other day on John Hilmer's report on the deputy prime minister, what's his name? Rogozin, I think, Rogozin. And he says, look, this is going on too long. We've got to decapitate in this thing. He says, what is Zelensky doing running around alive? So if a deputy prime minister is speaking against the program, then people are getting fed up with Putin. I mean, because it's gone on forever. And I'm sure that with the incompetent Russian central bank director with her 21% interest rates, that the hardship that results is probably being blamed on Putin's war. So he's got, and he protects this central bank director. This is the one who cost Russia all of her dollar-based foreign exchange reserves. She left them where the Americans could confiscate them. I mean, really, how can you be so incompetent and stay in office? It blows the mind. And so here she is, undermining support for the war with 21% interest rates and the hardships, and people say it's the war's fault. And here now is Trump with this feeling, I've got leverage, and it puts Putin in a very difficult position. If he refuses Trump's offer, then everybody will say, well, see, we told you, he's out to conquer Ukraine. And all of the pro-Western groups in Russia will get on him. If he accepts it, then all the rest are going to say, well, why'd you take us to war when you gave it all away? So you can see it's a problematic situation. And Putin is largely responsible for it.
Paul, the other policy which is so important for Donald Trump, that he's so vocal about, that is the tariffs. It's a new sort of sanctions that he's going to put on Europeans, on Canada, and Mexico. And I talked with Richard Wolff and Michael Hodson. Both of them are believing that this sort of policy would fire back on the United States, because at the end of the day, the tariffs would be inflation, or would be translated to some sort of increasing the cost for the American people. Here is what Donald Trump said about tariffs.
We're thinking in terms of 25% on Mexico and Canada, because they're allowing vast numbers of people. Canada's a very bad abuser also. Vast numbers of people to come in, and fentanyl to come in.
When do you think you would enact those?
I think February 1st.
Are you planning on giving notice of that?
I think we'll do it February 1st.
25% on both, sir?
Sir,
On each.
On each,
Yeah.
yes.
this is an
Yeah. How do you find the policy of tariffs on these countries?
Well, you know, the free market economists think that the United States developed on the basis of free trade. This is completely false. The United States developed on the basis of very high tariffs. Indeed, the Southern secession in 1861 was blocked by Lincoln for the explicit purpose of making them pay the tariff to finance the North's industrialization. Lincoln himself said, I think in his inaugural address, that he had no intention whatsoever of interfering with slavery, and had no authority under the Constitution to do so. It was a state issue. And that the reason to go to war was to enforce the tariff. Well, the tariff that was imposed the day before Lincoln was inaugurated was massive. It was a tremendous tariff, and it remained a long time. And we had tariffs. We had them, and we had them. And tariffs financed the United States government. We didn't have an income tax until 1913. And we really didn't have one then, because they brought it in at such a low rate and applying to such a high income that hardly affected anybody in the United States. And it wasn't until a few years later, when World War II got going, World War I got going, that the rates went up and you finally had an income tax. So the shift in American finance from tariffs to the income tax happened with the First World War. So you could actually finance the government on the basis of tariffs and not have any income tax. And that would be, from an economic standpoint, the best thing to do, because the classical economists all emphasize that you should not tax factors of production. You should never tax labor or investment. You can tax consumption. That's what tariffs do. Now, I think the reason the tariff issue came up with Trump is that it was not correctly explained to him that the reason we have a trade deficit with China is not because of China, it's because Wall Street forced the American corporations to offshore their production to China. So when the goods that they make in China are brought back to the United States to sell, they come in as imports. And so the cause of the American trade deficit with China is the American corporations. They're producing the products there, the Levi's, the Nike shoes, the Apple products, computers, iPhones, Apple watches. All of this stuff is produced by American companies in China, and they come back. And when they come back, they're imports. They count as imports. And no one has told him that. He thinks that China is somehow doing us the dirty and flooding us with cheap goods. And well, if you ever bought a cheap pair of Nike shoes or a cheap pair of Levi's or a cheap Apple computer or iPhone, no. So this is where the misunderstanding in Trump's mind came from. And so he sees tariffs as a way of punishing people who he thinks are abusing us in the trade relationships. But it's like Mexico and Canada. They're not the cause of American companies locating their production there. It's cost. It's lower labor cost. It's all kinds of costs are lower. And so if you offshore your production to lower labor cost, you don't drop your price. The price of an Apple computer has never dropped because it was produced in China. If anything, they go up. And the saving on labor goes into the share price. That's why Apple is somewhere up in the heavens. And it goes into the performance bonuses of the executives who've increased profits by getting rid of American labor and substituting labor in Asia. So that's the problem. The whole consequence of the jobs offshoring, which has been going on since the Soviet collapse, the whole consequence is to deindustrialize the United States, to destroy the manufacturing capability of the United States, destroy the tax base of cities and states that were manufacturing centers. I mean, a lot of these cities were absolutely ruined. It was almost like a war had hit them. You destroy the ladders of upward mobility where poor people could get blue-collar jobs, make a good income because the labor productivity was high, because they were working with a lot of capital. And so people could rise up and people could get ahead in life in America. That was why we would call it an opportunity society. Well, the minute you offshore, all that stops. And what was the immediate consequence? A massive concentration of income and wealth in a few hands. No more opportunity for anybody else. So what he needs to do is not think of tariffs as a punishment, but to force the American firms to bring the jobs home. Why should American firms be allowed to ban American labor from the production of the goods and services that the American firms sell to Americans, so that we don't have any of the income that comes from the production of these jobs. So this is why there's been no growth in real American incomes for such a long time. This is why there's such an increase in the indebtedness of the American people. These are the real debt problems, not the federal debt. It's the debt on the Americans, people living on credit cards. They can barely make the minimum payment. The debt grows every day. Well, this is the issue that has to be addressed and adjusted. And this is the one that Trump is missing. This is the great failure in his economic approach. And So the real story is different than, will tariffs mean higher prices? Who knows? Certainly, moving the production offshore didn't mean lower prices. You won't find any lower prices of any of the things that come in. And so, but that question is different from whether or not you could actually finance a government based on tariffs. Look, Nima, when I was a young man studying economics, it was simply taken for granted. The United States was a self-contained country. We produced all our own needs. We had no imports. Paul Samuelson, which was the leading economist of the time, made the point over and over that we are self-sufficient. We don't need foreign trade. And we produce our own things with our own labor, and we get the income from the production of the things we consume. And this was stressed over and over every 1 year. Even years later, when I was Assistant Secretary of the Treasury, if memory serves, the only item that the United States had a trade deficit in was oil. Well, today we really don't produce things. We haven't got anything to trade. And I used to report on it. It's been some years back, and things may have changed. But we sell scrap metal, scrap lumber, materials that can be recycled. I mean, we sell the packaging, the remains of somebody else's production. Well, to bring this back is a huge challenge, and I'm not sure how you do it. And one possible way is that you tax the corporations based on where they produce the products they sell to America. If they produce at home, the products they sell to America, you give them a low tax rate. If they produce abroad, the products you sell to America, you give them a high tax rate. And you use the tax differential to offset the lower cost of producing abroad. So there's no gain from it, or even a loss from it. You fix it so they can make more money producing in the United States. Then they start coming back, and then we start rebuilding a disciplined workforce, which we've lost. We start rebuilding the supply chains, which we've lost. And we become a manufacturing society again. And if we don't, we're going to continue to degenerate into a third world status. And Trump won't be able to make America great again. This is the great missing piece in Trump's approach. And who's responsible for keeping him in the dark? I don't know. It may just be they don't understand what's going on. It's hard to believe they could be so incompetent not to see the obvious, but it's possible. Or it may be they're just indoctrinated like free market economists that, it's free trade, free trade, free trade. They can't think beyond a slogan. We basically never had free trade. We had a civil war to make sure we didn't have free trade.
Thank you so much, Paul, for being with us today. Great pleasure as always.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Nima. I'll enjoy being on your program. You ask good questions.
Yeah. See you.